All right, what's up? So today is one of the most hotly contested topics in the community over the past couple of weeks has finally gotten some news. So we got some news on tier sets. Scarazard released a massive blue post today outlining some of the future of tier sets, and I read this a little bit, and I kind of want to talk about some of the highlights. We know that, and I probably should have pulled this up in advance, but I'll pull it up right now. We know that this is a part 1 post, right? So according to Scarazard, this is a part 1 of a tier acquisition post and like the catalyst retrospective, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do today is cover the most important talking points, just kind of cover the post in general, and then talk about what I kind of want to see out of part 2 and kind of hope that part 2, like what the things that I would like for part 2 to address. And so first off, they start by talking about like the revival catalyst, formerly named the creation catalyst, and they wanted to kind of do a little bit of a retrospective. In addition to that, they were talking about like why we were on the current cadence that we were on, right? So it's like, let's talk about the things that we did change from Sepulcher until now, because coming into Shadowlands Season 3, where the catalyst was introduced, there was a number of compounding issues that made an experience of assembling your set frustrating. And what were these? And these are things that got changed coming into 10.0. Sepulcher was notoriously more difficult than intended, meaning that even competent and very committed guilds was very difficult to take down the tier bosses, especially the first week. On top of this, Sepulcher released in segments, whereas Lords of Dread and Raglan had 2 completely separate class tokens that were attached to them as well. There was also special loot trading requirements because we were on personal loot as opposed to master looter. That means that there was even further restrictions. The Great Vault accessibility was significantly harder because players were killing and filling in fewer spots in their Great Vault just as a whole, which they go to talk about in a second. And then in addition to that, many of our tests and projections were expecting a lot of players would meet the raid thresholds of 3, 5, and 8. Bosses killed each weekend, as I mentioned above. It didn't happen regularly for quite a while because of the difficulty of the raid. And so these are some of the things that changed, obviously, just as time went on. They ended up changing. And so that was the world of 9.2. We're highlighting these factors alongside a 6-week release of the timing of the original Catalyst. Show the snowball effect of acquisition reward systems can have. Players weren't killing as many bosses early on, which means that they weren't killing the rest of the class set bosses, which means that less people had the tier, which means that less people had tier that appeared in the Great Vault. And this was just like kind of a snowballing compounding effect is what they're talking about. And so what changed moving into Vault of the Incarnates in Dragonflight Season 1? Basically, one of the things that changed is all trading restrictions for raid items were removed. This means that guilds clearing Heroic and Normal had a much faster and easier way of accessing set tokens. In addition to that, things such as splits got better. Obviously, this is not relevant for most players, but things such as splits got better. You were also able to like target very specific players to get tier on. So say somebody had already gotten like 1 piece, or even they got in 2 pieces out of their vault or something like that, and they needed their 4 set, they could get targeted with like the last 2 pieces, even if it was from normal. In addition to that, they greatly increased the appearance rate of class set items from your slots in the Great Vault across the board. And so this wasn't known for certain, but I saw some numbers on Wowhead early on, and I talked to Squishy about this. We were passing information back and forth, and he was saying that it seemed like you got a significantly higher chance of getting a piece of tier from the Great Vault. And so this has now been confirmed. This is not something that's like super new, super unheard of, but it's good to see that it's confirmed. In addition to that, great slots for the raid moved to 2, 4, to 6 because we only had an 8-boss raid. That, combined with it being a shorter raid, meant that less individual loot in your pools, so there was a higher percentage chance of not only make it to set token bosses, but also a higher chance of maxing out your vault weeks earlier than in Season 3. And so those are some of the factors, vault related, of course. And then now, knowing that the 6-week catalyst unlock timing would still be controversial, we held fast due to knowing of the other incoming changes. This is not surprising. It is definitely controversial, especially for players who only do M+ and only do PvP, and we'll talk about this in a second. But without peering too much behind the curtain, we were able to see the vast majority of the players filling at least between 3 and 6 Great Vault slots. By far the most common bracket of players who engaged with the Vault at all earlier in the season either had their 4 set bonus before the Revival Catalyst opened up, or were on set to complete it that very week. Obviously, these are players who raid more often than not, or partake in multiple avenues of content, but mostly raid plus do something else. Players were killing more bosses on harder difficulties than ever before, which led to more vault slots and more gear trading, which turned into progressing deeper into the raid earlier, which continues the positive loop of players getting geared faster. That said, some readers will correctly identify that there's groups of players who are still left out of this bounty, and those who only engage in only M+ and only with PvP with 0 rating at all. These players still, on average, had decent luck at getting some set pieces via the Great Vault change, but were extremely unlikely to complete their 4-set bonus before the Catalyst arrived. Okay, and this is something that I definitely want to come back and talk about after we finish this post. And so that's the basis of Season 1. We can still think we can do better for more players. So let's talk about what's changing in Dragonflight Season 2. First off, we're reverting the weekly quest system to get the Catalyst charge in favor of how it worked in Shadowlands Season 3. For those unaware, this is very simple. Every week, all characters on your account get a charge, no action required. We wanted to experiment with making the acquisition of charges somewhat more of an effort and investment, in players' part of having a currency cost. Basically, okay. So instead of having a currency cost, they want it to be like a charge-based system with you participating in content. In 9.2, there was, the Cosmic Flux plus the charge system. In this season, you only have to do 4 dungeons, kill a couple of bosses, that kind of thing, to be able to get an additional charge across the board. But in doing so, we ended up taking a step backwards on one of the founding goals of the Catalyst of the system itself: mid or late season catch up for newer returning characters. Because for those who don't know, if you start a new character late, you start out with 0 charges for whatever reason. That seems like a mistake. And so basically, whereas 9.2 system would greet fresh 60s with many Catalyst charges because the only thing that was gating them was Cosmic Flux. And so you were greeted with all of these charges, able to craft a class set for a hefty Cosmic Flux fee. Level 70 players in Dragonflight Season 1 quickly found out if they were late to the party, it would always take 6 weeks to reach the charge cap. And that's a mistake. Definitely a mistake. And so basically a couple of quick hits on how it's going to change is now up on the Catalyst opening. Players will receive a charge for every one of their characters. These functions the exact same way they always have. If your main spends a few to convert the item early on in the season, it doesn't impact that individual characters, or an alt on your account, or an alt made in the future. Unlike in Shadowlands Season 3, there will be no cost associated beyond the charge spent. No Cosmic Flux, no Dragon Owl supplies, no Apexis crystals. If you've done the work in obtaining a convertible item, that's enough for us. Okay, good change, by the way. This is actually a really, really great change. Secondly, and this is huge actually, we're adding a new seasonal achievement, tentatively titled Dragonflight Season 2 Master. You may be aware in that 9.2 or 10.0, we had some achievements that would require you to clear the Mythic Raid or obtain very high Mythic Plus or PvP thresholds to obtain a reward. In Shadowlands Season 3, it was a special item to upgrade your conduits. In Dragonflight Season 1, it was a cosmetic item. They gave you visual effects. We're keeping that style of achievement and reward moving forward, but we want to experiment with a more seasonal milestone and more seasonal milestones as you progress towards your goals. Here's how it'll work. Season 2 Master is rewarded for clearing the raid on heroic difficulty, obtaining 2200 Mythic Plus rating, or obtaining 1800 rating in PvP. And these are all 3 completely ors, right? These are completely separate things. You can do one of the 3. Doing so will award that character a Draconic Mark of Mastery, which is an item that can be turned into a vendor for any heroic level class set item of your choice. And this can only be earned once per character, but this is available the day Dragonflight Season 2 begins. Holy shit, by the way. The item received from Mark of Mastery is also fully upgradable with the Shadowflame crests and flight stones, like all items in the universal upgrade system coming with this patch. And so that's obviously a deeper rabbit hole, but basically they're removing Valor and they're kind of changing some of the upgrade paths for the crafted gear. And without getting into it too much, basically it's upgradable to mythic level once you complete some prerequisites and get some items. This achievement and its reward is to serve a few functions. We're interested in adding a non-raid method of obtaining a guaranteed tier set item for those players we mentioned previously. Additionally, we are interested in testing the waters to see how players feel about the ability to be able to earn relevant power rewards for their progression and performance within a given season. For the most skilled and coordinated players, this token will be something they can earn within a matter of days or even a week. For others, it's a medium or even a long-term goal to push that to provide items otherwise out of their typical reach. And so lastly, and this is raid specific, the final boss of the raid in 10.1 will drop 1 Omni token on defeat of all difficulties from your group, guaranteed. And we're still hammering out the specifics here, but like of the mark of mastery above, any player in possession of it will be able to take it to a vendor and purchase a class set item of that level and upgrade band appropriate to the raid difficulty it came from. Also worth noting before we talk about the raid rewards change in its fullest, takes and that is sometime in the season, either with the reopening of the revival catalyst or shortly thereafter. We'll be adjusting how often set tokens drop in raid as well. At current state, class set tokens drop at a ratio of 1 per 10 players, scaling up to 2 per 20 and 3 per 30 guaranteed. We'll be reducing this number as the season progresses, as we've heard feedback from players making late season runs and Mythic Progression or AOTC. They're already very often have their class set tokens and at an item level that's decently above or comparable to those dropping because of things such as, the Catalyst or the Great Vault giving you pretty high level tier. This can make bosses feel less exciting and rewarding at the end of a season, especially when hunting specific trinkets or weapons. And I think that this is like super good. Actually, a really smart change. Okay. And so that's basically the end all for what this post was saying. So I want to cover a couple of specific things. So overall, I think it's a great post. I think before we start talking about some of the stuffs that I like and some of the stuffs I dislike, overall, I think this is a great post. It's incredibly insightful, and I think that Blizzard just making things of this caliber should be celebrated, because for a very long time, we did not have this level of communication from Blizzard. And so before we start with anything, I want to say thank you, because this is a big deal. So let's talk about... I guess let's talk about the Omni Token. I think the Omni Token is actually super sick. I'm interested in a couple of very specific things about the Omni Token, and this is obviously very raid specific. Is the Omni Token going to be the highest eye level of tier? Is it going to... Are we still going to have the situation where the Vault is the highest eye level of tier that you're able to get for some pieces outside of the Omni Token? Is the Omni Token going to, drop this Razageth eye level gear where we have tiered eye level gear, that kind of thing? Those are some of the questions that I have, where it's like the only way to get 424 pants is to get the Razageth pants and catalyze them. Is now the easiest way either to catalyze a piece or get this Omni Token. That's something that is actually kind of important to ask about. I think that's something that could be addressed, but overall this is kind of a small potatoes kind of issue. But I think that the Omni Token is actually a very smart change, and it incentivizes final bosses of a tier quite nicely. Let's talk about the seasonal achievement. And so once you're able to get either 2200 Mythic Plus rating, 1800 in PvP, or fully clear the raid on heroic difficulty, you're able to get a guaranteed piece of tier. I think this is a sick change. This is a lot more tier for a lot more players, and there was one of the complaints about Master Loot has been just like tanks and healers aren't getting tier that fast. Whether that's true or not, it's like difficult to fully assess, but tanks and healers aren't getting a tier as fast has definitely been one of the common complaints. Some players are kind of getting snubbed. Sometimes you get a little bit unlucky with what tier does drop. And so universally just kind of giving everybody one piece of tier for completing relatively hard content, especially early on, is quite nice. In addition to that, this helps alt catch up, because once you get level a character, you could either get boosted through the raid, or you could get boosted to 2200. I guess you probably get boosted through the raid would be the fastest thing, but then you're able to get one piece of tier almost immediately, especially the Catalyst is now. That's going to help you slingshot yourself and catch back up, especially if you take a couple of weeks off. So I think that this change right here is absolutely phenomenal. The only thing that they have yet to address in my mind that is absolutely super important was that what I was talking about earlier, where some players are still feeling left out of this system. That said, some readers will correctly identify that there are groups of players who are still left out of this bounty. These are players who engage with only Mythic Plus and only PvP with 0 rating at all. These players still on average had decent luck getting some set pieces via the Great Vault, but were extremely unlikely to complete their 4-set bonus before the Catalyst arrived. This is very problematic to me, especially whenever you have that contrasted with players completed their tier, from raid, they were talking about players completed their tier weeks in advance, and then to be players who only engaged with Mythic Plus or only engaged with PvP were extremely unlikely, not just unlikely, but extremely unlikely to complete their 4-set bonus before the catalyst arrived. And the term extremely unlikely doesn't make it sound like it's one piece away, like this one piece is going to change anything. It makes it sound like there is a fundamental issue of tier. And I'm somebody who rates, right? For me, realistically, does this matter to me so much? Not really. I'm getting tier, I'm doing splits, I'm getting my tier super early. This doesn't really matter to me as much. However, I do think that this is a criminally underrepresented group for tier acquisition purposes, and something needs to change. This is a group of players that is like, you need to release the catalyst like the first day of the season for me, because not only do they believe that, like, they honestly genuinely think things such as tier shouldn't come from raid, tier should only come from the catalyst. And whenever they are extremely unlikely to complete their 4-set bonus before the catalyst arrived, I kind of tend to agree with that. I don't think that it feels fun to zone into an arena game and some raider has their 4-set and they just absolutely blast you, and you sit there and you open up the calendar and you are still 4 weeks away from the catalyst unlocking and you have 0 pieces of tier, or you have 1 piece of tier. That feels awful. Or you look at somebody else's damage in a pug in Mythic Plus, and you are a skilled player and you are doing higher level keys than them, but they are absolutely blasting you into the dirt damage-wise because they spend a little bit more time in the raid. Now, that being said, you should, as a raider, get rewarded for doing raid, and I think that raid content should be incentivized, but I think that there is a fundamental issue with the catalyst as it currently stands and tier acquisition if this right here is not fixed. And that being said, I really do hope that Blizzard goes further into this, right? This, in my mind, is a great change for a lot of players, but this is not a solution to many players because they are still extremely unlikely to complete their 4-set bonus before the catalyst arrived. In addition to that, imagine if you take a week or 2 off early on in the season, which isn't an unlikely situation. You are basically just AFK until the catalyst arrived because you are not going to be able to get your tier. Whereas if you are raiding, you can get that tier funneled to you in some capacity. Now, that is contingent on a guild or other players being able to forfeit their loot to you, but it's still possible. Whereas in this situation, it is literally impossible. And I think that Blizzard needs to be looking to hopefully change something about this. And I hope that we see something coming in the part 2 of the post. Another point that I also want to make is that with this change, even here, like, while it is a great change allowing all players to perform hard content and get guaranteed a piece of tier, this arguably helps raiders more of getting a tier set acquisition boost than Mythic Plus players, because Mythic Plus and PvP only players were already so far off getting their tier set bonuses in general. This will kind of be more likely to help those players that were on the cusp of getting their 3-set into their 4-set from raid, as opposed to helping these extremely unlikely players to be able to complete their 4-set bonus. And I think that that's also a fundamental issue that needs to be solved. Overall, though, as I stated, this is an absolute home run of a post. I think that all of the stuff that they talked about and just kind of the behind the curtain view into tier and loot acquisition, I think this is an excellently written post. I loved all of the parts that were inside of it. I hope that the things that I talked about at the very end do get addressed, such as, again, Mythic Plus only players, PvP only players, making sure that their loot concerns get addressed, because it's not just an issue. It is something that needs to be solved. And we've had this issue be a thing for now 2 seasons, where some players get tier very, very fast, and some players don't get tier at all until the catalyst unlocks, and their only source of tier is the catalyst. And that, in my opinion, for players who are actively playing the game, is going to be an issue. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. I'm going to link the post down as well, down in the description. You guys can write some stuff on the forums. In addition to that, that's going to be it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.